Chapter 8. The Crevice of Anger and Lies. The boy and the fox awoke rested. The day was warm, almost sultry, and the air was still. As they travelled along the pebble-strewn path, the hills seemed to echo with the sound of their footsteps. How oddly quiet, thought the boy, as he scanned the barren hillside to his right. They had left the beautiful forest behind them, and now they travelled on terrain that consisted of rolling hills, random oak trees, brown grass, and lots of large rock outcroppings. They had walked along for several hours when the fox nudged the boy. Looking down, the boy noticed something different in the fox's eye. The fox had a worried look on his face. "What's wrong, Fox?" asked the boy. The fox answered, "I have just witnessed an ignis fatuus." "A what?" "Well, it's hard to explain, but there was just now conjured within my mind a real bad scene, boy. I need to go through the next adventure with you. I give you courage. That's my word." At that, the boy's emotions stirred. The afternoon sun was now sinking below the mountains to the west, leaving the boy and the fox in dusky twilight. Deciding to stop for the night, the boy gathered some wood and built a small fire. The fox came back with some beef jerky, and after satisfying their hunger, the fox nestled up close to the boy and they slept. The next day was a good day. The sun came out and shone warm on their bodies. The boy felt stronger than ever, and there before them lay the triple peaks. As he was admiring the 3 peaks, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. He strained and squinted, and he realized that something awesome was really there. Gleaming and glistening around each of the peaks was a brilliant halo of bright white light. At nearly the top of the middle peak was what looked like a ruby. The boy felt really good, and the fox looked up at him and he communicated with the boy with just his eyes. The fox's eyes were so deep and soft and full of movement. The boy thought for just a moment that if he could look into the fox's eyes hard enough and long enough, he might find the answers to all his questions. The boy and the fox were becoming part of each other, and they knew that they were partners in this journey. The screech of a hawk brought the boy's awareness back to his surroundings. Looking ahead, he said, "Guess we'd better get on our way, huh, Fox?" The fox nodded his head. They began their journey again, and soon they came to a second section of the trail with huge granite rocks and boulders. It looked as though a landslide had brought the granite tumbling down and planted them in artistic outcroppings. As they progressed up the path, the rocks seemed to get closer together. Picking their way amongst the rocks and huge meandering switchbacks, they finally reached an elevated point that looked down over the box canyon. The boy was just stared at the next section of the trail. It dropped down into the box canyon and continued straight up the face of the far sheer cliff. The boy stood pointing at the cliff, and he said anxiously, "We'll never be able to climb that." "Relax, lad. When we get there, there'll be a way." The boy and the fox made their way into the canyon, and even within 110 feet of the cliff, the boy was still shaking his head and complaining that it was a big waste of time. However, just as the fox had said, a crack appeared to the left, and the trail led right to a cold, narrow granite crevice. The boy looked at the fox, and instead of the gloating the boy expected to see, the fox's fur was standing up from his nose to the tip of his tail. "What's wrong?" asked the boy. The fox looked up and simply said, "Courage." "Courage? No way, man. Let's go on a different way if there's a problem." "This is the trail to the Triple Peaks, and it's this way we should go," responded the fox. As they went further, the walls of the crevice became smooth as glass. The rocks of polished granite were so smooth they were almost mirror-like. The boy could see his reflection as they walked. At one point, the walls became so close to each other, the boy could almost reach out his hands and touch both walls at once. It was dimmer now, too. He could look way up to the top of the gorge and see that the sky was still a brilliant blue, but the light was more subdued at the bottom of the crevice. They proceeded deep into this narrow corridor. The fox was visibly scared. His hair was standing on end. He looked as though he was preparing for action, and the boy remembered the word courage. The boy thought to himself, "Am I prepared?" Immediately his hand went to the belt, and he took out the key and held it. Then he saw it, or maybe he didn't see it. Maybe he only heard it. He couldn't decide, but he knew it was there, a rumbling in the distance. He looked right behind him and he thought, "If something comes at me, this is a pretty bad place to be. There's only one way out, and that's to run back the way we came." The boy gripped the key a little tighter, and in some strange way it made him feel powerful. Then he did see it, off in the distance. Ahead of him down the narrow path was a mass of something, and he could just make out the movement. It, a conglomerate of things, was coming right at them. What was it? The boy looked at both walls. He could see that they were so smooth, there were no cracks, not even a way to get a finger hold on them. It would be impossible to climb out of there. The boy suddenly felt cold, and the air thickened and grew dark. The mass was still getting closer, and he could start to make out shapes. He thought, "They're moving so strongly. They seem to be angry." As they got closer, he could see that they were massive creatures with spiked scale-like plates covering them from the base of their heads down their backs. They had heads like bulls. They walked on two legs, their weight shifting from side to side. Their arms swung back and forth in opposite to the shifting of their bodies. They were steaming and snorting and screaming at each other as they tumbled toward the boy and the fox. They beat on each other and they stomped on each other and violently walked over the tops of the ones in front as they marched up the crevice. Their scales were oily and ugly. The beasts seemed so strong and full of powerful anger. As they neared, the boy could see that there was steam coming from their scales. Then he noticed that the beasts were all different colours. The ones who were angrier were bright red and had more steam coming out of their scales than the orange ones. The angriest were almost white, white as fire, with steam just boiling from their bodies. The boy thought, "Run! Run!" And he and the fox turned and ran back toward the other end of the valley. As the boy ran, he looked over his shoulder to see whether they were gaining on him. He saw that each creature's arm had 3 claws on it. They were raising their fists in the air and yelling, "He's mine! No, he's mine! I want the fox!" Their anger terrified the boy, and he ran like the wind. But he soon realized that because of their massiveness, they weren't as quick as he was, so he relaxed his pace, jogging comfortably alongside the fox. Soon the fox said, "Wait, look." Looking ahead of him, the boy saw something new coming at them from the other direction. And he had seen the first creatures. A voice within him had warned, "Anger, anger." Now, as he looked at what approached them, that same voice cried, "Lies, lies." Blocking the only escape were hundreds of undulating creatures, all a part of each other, yet separate. They were tangled and meshed within each other, arms, legs, faces, all long and stretchy and rubbery. Some were white, some were grey, and some were black. Their bodies seemed transparent. "There's no way out," thought the boy. He gripped the key even tighter, and he held it up before him, thinking, "It's my only hope." He looked back the other way to see the anger creatures coming at him, wrathfully screaming and yelling. They were violently trampling each other, trying to get at him. The long, dangling, tentacle-like arms of the lie creatures were reaching his way. They were slimy, and they oozed along together, whispering, "Lies, lies, lies." They bobbed up and down in a wave-like fashion. The boy thought, "What do I do? I can't fight them all by myself." As he trembled, he remembered courage. The tall, angular things, some with multiple heads, were coming, and the bulky, muscular things were coming. Their beady eyes gleamed at the boy. They got closer, and he heard anger, anger, anger on one side, and lies, lies, lies on the other. The fox looked at the boy. His eyes were big as saucers, his fur standing straight up on end, and he was shaking. The creatures drew in. The boy put his shield bracelet on his arm, and in the other he still held the key tightly. He held them both up. The lies were close enough now so he could see their features. They wore sickening smiles on their faces. The boy and the fox were penned in. The first lie, who seemed to be the leader, said in a syrupy sweet voice, "We won't hurt you. We're your friends. We won't hurt you. We're your friends." In gruff voices, the anger creatures said, "We want him." The lies, all tangled and intertwined like a can of worms, said, "You remember us. We helped you out of a lot of sticky situations." Strangely, the boy did remember. The creatures inched closer. The boy could smell their stench. The boy's hair stood straight up. His only defense was to raise his arms up to keep them away, but now the angry creatures were moving in too. He turned toward them, then back to the lies. They had him. All of a sudden, one of the lies yelled out, "He doesn't have the book!" The boy's belt was open, and they could see the empty spot. Both crowds of creatures lunged at the boy, and the fox leaped up against his chest, and together they fell back against the mirror-like surface of the rock. Then the rock gave way. As though it were made of marshmallow or jelly, he sank right into it, completely vanishing from the crevice. He fell down a dark chute, sliding head first on his back. As he slid, he thought, "My shield, my key," and he immediately stuck them back in their places on the pouch for fear he would lose them. He slid faster and faster. The chute twisted and curved down. He was falling so fast he thought, "I will have to hit something to stop." But the boy continued to slide. In fact, he slid so long that his fear subsided, and he began to think about what had just happened. They had said he didn't have the book. What book? And why had they suddenly rushed him at that moment? There must be something more, he thought. His thoughts returned to his sliding downward into the depths of the earth. He decided to just relax. It was dark and he couldn't see, so he closed his eyes. It seemed as though he would slide forever. At that moment, the boy slid into warm water, the softest landing he could ever imagine. The surprise of the landing caused the boy to release the fox, who continued sailing through the air. He opened his eyes and looked around. It was dark, but as his eyes became accustomed to the darkness, he saw tiny, dim, twinkling lights everywhere. The lights reminded him of Bartram's den. Looking around, he realized that he was in a huge cavern. All around him was water, but nearby he saw a sandbar. The boy picked himself up and waded to it. He crawled up onto the sand and lay down, exhausted from all that had just happened. Dropping his head down onto the sand, the boy glanced across the sandbar and saw a welcome sight. There, trotting toward him, was the fox. The wet fox lay down beside the boy, and they both rested and caught their breath.